Hey friends, I am starting to do all of my online seed shopping and all of my garden planning for the upcoming spring and summer. And while I'm going through all of my stuff and getting my stuff ready, I thought I would share that with you as I go through it so you can go ahead and get all of your garden and seed starting planned out and all of your summer garden planning started. So I'm going to start a series. I'm going to try to do a bunch of shorter videos that will be posted to my Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And it'll just be education for people who are looking to start their garden or get into gardening. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is your zone and your frosts. So I am in very northwest Kansas, okay? If you live near me, we are in zone 6A now. It was zone 5B, but all of the USDA hardiness zones were just updated this year, and they moved us from zone 5B to zone 6A. So what does that mean, and how does that affect us? Your hardiness zone basically just tells you how cold it's going to get. So for zone 6A, our low temperature, average lowest temperature, or not average, but throughout the years, the lowest temperature that it gets on average is like -5 to -10 degrees. We do have the outliers, or you might have a very mild winter, but on average throughout the 10 years or 12 years or however often they update it, that's the lowest temperature that it gets. With 5B, where we just were, it was like -10 to -15 was what it was. So now we're in zone 6A. How does this affect us? So all that tells you is what kind of plants are perennial in your area. How hardy your plants are tells you if they can survive in your climate, in your area or not. So like echinacea, or herbs. We'll go with herbs because I am working on my herb garden. I do have echinacea in there. Can be used as kind of an herb. But, so those are hardy in my area. So when you're looking at potential perennials or herbs, if you want something to come back next year, look at the back of the seed packet or look at the information tag, and it will tell you if it's hardy down to your zone that you're in. So for us, 6A. Okay. So that tells us about your hardiness zone. The next thing, probably the most important thing we need to look at, is going to be your frost dates. So you can find both of these on almanac.com. I think that's where, look up Old Farmer's Almanac or USDA. Just go on Google and type in hardiness zone by zip code, and then put in your zip code. It'll tell you where you are. Or frost dates by zip code, and it will take you to a website. You punch in your zip code, and it tells you what zone you're in and when your last and first frost dates are. So for my area, northwest Kansas, our last frost date, which is probably the most important, is May 6th, and our first frost date is October 3rd. So that gives us a 149-day growing season. So why does this matter? We need to know our first and last frost dates and kind of our growing season length, because we need to know when to start our seeds. So I pulled out just a few of my tomatoes real quick. And on your seed packets, it will probably tell you somewhere. So start indoors 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost. So whatever your last frost is, mine's May 6th, count back 6 to 8 weeks from there. I recommend doing 6 weeks because that way they don't get too big inside, and you can always keep them inside a little bit longer if you get to your last frost date and you look ahead in your 10-day forecast and still see that you have a freeze coming and you're not ready to plant them out quite yet. So go with the lower number. And then it will tell you. So then the other part is days till maturity. So this one tells me right here, if you can see. So this is the Am I Gardener? Hello. So you can kind of see there. So it's 65 to 80 days till maturity. So that way you know how many days you'll be able to harvest, kind of how long. So if it takes, 80 days on the long end to get to maturity, and that is from when you plant it out into the garden, not from when you started it, when you plant it out into the garden. You know that, you have a 150-day growing season, you'll be harvesting it for about this long. So that's why that's important to know. And your frost dates are important. That way you know when to start seeds and when you can direct sow some seeds out. And we will touch on if you need to direct sow or start indoors and transplant or buy a transplant somewhere. We will talk about that down the line. The next thing I wanted to talk about is talking about a freeze. So talking about the hardiness of plants. Some plants are hardy, some are tender. Tomatoes are going to be a tender crop. They're not going to handle a freeze. They don't like cold weather. Same with peppers. But some herbs, a lot of herbs are pretty hardy. So they can, not only are they perennial and will come back, they can handle a light freeze. So a light freeze would be from 32 degrees down to 29 degrees. A moderate freeze is 28 degrees to 25 degrees. And then a hard freeze is going to be 24 degrees and cooler. That's pretty much going to kill everything off unless it's like a pine tree. But that doesn't mean they won't come back. That goes down to, is it hardy to your area? Can that root, that dormant plant, deal with having a freeze down to 0 degrees? That's why your hardiness matters. And then that's why your frost dates matter as well. And then real quick, I did just want to touch on some season extenders. So we have a 150-day growing season. There are a few ways to extend your season. If you live in the north, you're going to have a shorter growing season, so you might need to utilize some of these methods. Things like starting your seeds indoors, using a cold frame, a greenhouse, or a high tunnel or hoop house. Those are all ways of extending your growing season. So a cold frame is just basically a mini high tunnel, a mini hoop house essentially. So I'll pop some pictures up here as I go through these. But a cold frame is just an unheated, no climate control, small structure that usually has 4 walls and a window or a clear thing on top to kind of trap heat in. Those can be used early and late in the season to extend your growing season. Another thing is greenhouse and a high tunnel. So a high tunnel and a hoop house are kind of the same thing. They are both not climate controlled. A greenhouse is climate controlled. So I have a Paul Ram Canopia greenhouse coming. It's not a greenhouse because it will not be climate controlled. Technically, it is just a high tunnel or a hoop house because it's not climate controlled. I could stick heaters in there, but I'm probably not going to. So that's the difference between a high tunnel and a greenhouse. For all intents and purposes, I'm going to be calling my structure a greenhouse, as would most people with like the little pop-up greenhouses or whatever you have in your backyard. Those you're going to call a greenhouse. But when you hear people say high tunnel or hoop house, a lot of growers have these, and like market gardeners or garden centers have these to grow their plants. Greenhouses are climate controlled and high tunnels are not. Cold frames are just mini high tunnels. So that is all I'm going to touch on this time, and I will see you next time.